Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's What Turns You On webinar. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. And today we're going to be talking about unhealthy versus healthy sex, which is kind of a loaded topic. So I hope we have some fun thinking about this together. And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to it, or to subscribe to our channel by clicking the subscribe button below. And that way you don't ever miss a post. And you can also keep up with what we're doing here by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. And finally, make sure to sign up for our mailing list by clicking the link in the chat box so you can keep up with upcoming events, webinars, services, or anything else that might be going on here. So this workshop series, this webinar series, is meant to explore aspects of my workbook, What Turns You On, A Guide to Living Your Best Sex Life. And it's designed to help you get honest with yourself about how you define sex so you can enjoy the kind of touch and sexual activities you really like. And also so that you can um, have explicit and meaningful communications with your sexual partners. So the idea being when we really get clear about what we do and don't like, then we can communicate it to other people. And if we're not sure about what we want or don't want, then it's kind of hard to tell somebody else that. So that is the idea behind the workbook. And it's certainly the point of these webinar conversations, because I find so frequently that people do not really get clear with themselves first about what they want. And it's not just about sex and sexuality. It can be about anything. It can be about the kind of foods we like, or whether we like to travel or not, or the way we like to travel, or the way we want our jeans to fit. We just kind of go along to get along a lot of times, and to really start to explicitly explore is I have found a really fun experience. And sometimes the things we discover are not necessarily things we want to try, but we've learned about them and we've had some critical thinking about, well, what is it about that that I liked and what didn't I like about it? And I'll tell you, I just had this experience with this beautiful Netflix series called Dying for Sex. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's a limited series and it's really beautifully made and acted. And there's so much richness in this series, not just about sex, but about living and dying and orgasm. And it's incredibly funny and really painful and sweet. But it really challenges a lot of ideas about sex and sexuality that I found incredibly curious, enlivening, exciting, disturbing. So these are the kinds of things I want you to be thinking about as you get into this exploration. So whether you are on a webinar about this, or you're working through a workbook like What Turns You On, or watching a series that's explicitly about sex and sexuality, and there are many others that are streaming now also, like sex education. Just let yourself have fun with it and go with it and see where you land with it afterwards, and hopefully have a constructive conversation with a significant other, whether it's a lover or a best friend, so you can sort of sort out your thinking about it. So people often ask, the question of, well, what is healthy sex? And I've said this a million times before. I have no idea what it is. I know what it isn't, and I know what it is for myself, but I don't know what it is for other people. But I do know that unhealthy sex usually originates from a shame-based sexuality. So whenever we feel self-conscious about something, we're typically in the edges of shame, self-conscious, embarrassed, and unhealthy sex ends up taking advantage of other people. We use other people to get our needs met in ways that are furtive or secretive, or that they can even be abusive because we don't really know what's driving inside of us. towards these experiences. So if you're using sex or using other people or taking advantage of other people for sexual purposes, and it's not agreed upon, like it's not part of a BDSM scene, then that would be in the unhealthy category. And that's what I'm talking about right now is or unhealthy aspects of sex. And unhealthy sex also compromises our integrity. So we end up doing things that we don't really feel good about. And afterwards, it leaves us feeling gross or ashamed or like, why did I do that? Or I wish I hadn't done that. So if you're out of your integrity, if you're out of alignment with what's true for you, it's going to be unhealthy. And that could be true with food or alcohol or any number of other things also. It also confuses intensity for intimacy. I mean, I see this all the time with people that struggle with sex and love issues where, they're cheating and they cheat with people that can be downright dangerous sometimes. They're not just bad for them, but they're dangerous. But the excitation that comes from something being forbidden or potentially dangerous or being wanted so badly from someone who has like a stalker vibe is all about intensity. And that is a way to get out of a sense of deadness or not feeling good about oneself or escaping a circumstance that we're living in that we don't really like, but we can't be honest about, or we can't act on getting out of it. So really examine this notion of confusing intensity for intimacy. And unhealthy sex reenacts trauma and it cements old arousal patterns in the brain. So ask yourself, why am I doing this pattern over and over again? And does it tie to something that happened to me? I'll give you an example that's a pretty classic example. Um, a male client who identifies as heterosexual is oriented towards women but repeatedly has sex with men, and does not identify as being bisexual or gay, or even, poly or anything like that, or pansexual rather. Um, Feels terrible about having sex with men, but doesn't understand why he's doing it over and over again. And upon closer examination, we find out that his soccer coach sexually abused him when he was a child. So from the ages of, let's say, 10 to 14, he was being sexually abused. So that sexual experience is secretive, it's shaming, it's furtive, it's dangerous, it's intense. But the sexual arousal gets fused with all of those feelings. So that intensity is what drives him to seek anonymous sex with other men, even though he's married and loves his wife and doesn't want to be cheating on her, but he can't stop doing what he's doing. That is a scenario that's a little simplistic, but it is an example of a repetition compulsion of trauma. And unhealthy sex can often have the feeling of being distant from the self. So that same person can report feeling like they're not really present, they're not really in their body. It has a feeling of dissociation to it where you feel like it's impersonal or you're not really there, you're just getting off. And it's all about that uphill excitation, that real drive of novelty and dopamine that makes the orgasm, extraordinarily intense. But during the act itself, it's not connecting. It doesn't feel like there's a heart connection. Sometimes there's no eye contact, or if there is, the eyes are just sort of dead in both parties. They're there in the flesh and in the body and in the orgasm, but they're not there in the soul. The soul of the thing is missing, is what you could say. That's the best way I think I can describe it. It's also organized around past experiences or excitation about future ones. So trying to replicate something that happened in the past that was super hot, trying to get back to that again, or being in fantasy about some idea about what would be super hot in the future. Unhealthy sex relies on self-loathing. There is a vicious cycle of hating oneself for doing the thing that doesn't feel good afterwards. but doing it again because you hate yourself. And it's all about power and control over another person. It's not about any kind of equality or coming together for a joint connecting experience. An unhealthy sex serves to avoid feelings at all costs. So it's a way of getting out of feelings. Again, it's about the intensity. It is not about the intimacy, the vulnerability, the close-in tenderness that lovers can feel with each other. It can also be covert and manipulative. So really using the other person to get what I want and need. It creates a tolerance over time. There's always demands for more stimulation. So what happened last time wasn't good enough or exciting enough, so you always have to up the ante for unhealthy sex. And it requires a high level of compartmentalization, which is a feature of dissociation. So I have to tell myself that what I'm doing doesn't hurt anybody else. What somebody doesn't know doesn't hurt them. It's the last time I'll do it. It's not that big of a deal. I don't do it that often. So there are all these compartmentalized rationalizations, justifications, minimizing in order to keep pursuing and doing the thing over and over again. And it's rigid and it's routine. The person that's having this kind of sex can often only do it in the same way over and over again because that's how they get off, especially if it's a repetition compulsion. The scene's got to be set in a very particular way in order for it to work for the person. And that also over time starts to fade and fail the person involved with it too. And unhealthy sex can be without meaning, eroticism, or a spiritual connection. So you may want to take a moment to think about if any of this resonates for you, either currently or in the past, and also add to this list. If you've been engaging in unhealthy behaviors or you've engaged in unhealthy behaviors in the past, I mean, I started having sex very young. I was 14 years old when I tried to lose my virginity, and it was not a good experience. It was a terrible experience. I wouldn't wish it on any 14-year-old. But even through my teen years, I did a lot of those things. And some of it was in the name of experimentation. And so I don't want to, throw everything into the sex addiction bucket. But if you are past the age of experimentation, your teenage years, your early 20s, and you are well into your late 20s, early 30s, 40s, and beyond, and these things are resonating for you, then you really want to consider that you've got a problem here, that your sex life has become rigid. The way that you think about sex is perhaps distorted psychologically for you, and therefore it's going to be embodied in a distorted way. And especially if you're feeling sort of lost and empty and that you can't connect with anybody, if it doesn't feel good, then you likely have a problem, especially if it doesn't feel good and you keep repeating it over and over again. So where healthy sex is concerned, and these are again aspirational ideas. Not everybody's having these experiences every single time they have sex, but healthy sex should deepen a sense of oneself and embrace your erotic, animal, authentic sexual nature. And that's one of the things I loved about Dying for Sex, is that, there's probably no spoiler alert here when you recognize that this woman is really dying and she's dying to figure out who she is sexually also at the 11th hour. And so she's getting in touch with what her real authentic sexuality is. And that is the task at hand for all of us, no matter what decade of life we're in, because it changes from decade to decade. And I certainly hope that we don't have to wait until we're dying to figure out what kind of sex is most authentic and true for us, even if it's asexuality. So there's a note here from Richard. Hello, thank you, Alex, for describing what unhealthy sex includes. Much of your description is analogous to descriptions of sex addiction, correct? Is there a difference? If a person engages in a pattern of unhealthy sex, would this necessarily point to the existence of sex addiction? Well, I think that's what I was saying earlier, that yes, it likely does. And the key words here are if there's a person is engaging in a pattern of unhealthy sex, then you are either on the off-ramp to sex addiction or you're on the highway already. And you probably know the answer to that if you're watching this and you're concerned about this matter. So, healthy sex is also mutually respectful and honoring. There are conversations about consent and STIs and what the nature of this liaison is going to be. If it's only going to be casual and neither party's looking for anything else, then that's an agreement, and that's great, as opposed to somebody manipulating or seducing somebody into thinking it's going to be something more than it is, and then they have sex with that person and then they ghost them. That is not okay. That's unhealthy behavior. I mean, at the very least, it's rude. Um, and beyond that, it can be worse. But these are the kind of things that what turns you on is asking you to look at. There's a whole section on consent as well. Healthy sex reinforces a congruent sense of self. So again, you're not engaging in behavior that has you out of your integrity or that's inauthentic. So when you do it, it's aligned with what your value systems are. And that is an important thing to look at also. And you'll find that values table in both sexual reflections and in what turns you on, really getting clear about what your values are, what turns you on sexually, and if your sexual behaviors are congruent with that. And healthy sex recognizes vulnerability as the road to intimacy and eroticism. So, as opposed to using sex to get rid of feelings of vulnerability or avoid intimacy, it's all about the deep, close-in vulnerability and intimacy. And I believe that our eroticism bubbles up out of that. That we connect because we feel safe. And when we feel safe, we can trust. And when we trust and feel safe, then we can really go the distance in the erotic realm. We're willing to try all sorts of things, for fun and for exploration when we feel that kind of trust and safety. Someone writes here, if a certain sex position, woman on top with my wife, is close to the type of position I searched often to watch when I was addicted to porn, should I avoid this position with my wife? And I would say, well, the answer of that to that is it depends. If all you're doing is watching her genitals and objectifying her body, which there's nothing wrong with that, but you're not also making eye contact with her. You're not also talking to her, connecting with her, seeing her, and valuing what you're seeing and what she's giving to you, then it's problematic. So if you're in fantasy about somebody else and you're not connecting with her, then she's just a body on top of you, and she could be any body, so to speak. So much of this has to do with how connected we are with each other during the process of sex. And healthy sex allows for exploration, for sexual meaning making, and the rewiring of the brain in just the ways that I was talking about to this person. Same sex act, but we give meaning to sex acts, unlike animals who don't give any meaning to sex acts. They just do it when they're in heat. But what meaning are we giving to the act? How connected are we to our partner? Are we really seeing them? When we're looking, what are we looking at? How much of a heart connection do we actually have? Or is it just a genital to genital connection? Is it just about getting off? And healthy sex requires being embodied. So you're really feeling the sensations in your body. You're noticing the sensations in your body. You're noticing your partner's responsiveness, the color of the skin, the heat coming off of their skin, the sounds they're making, the contact they're making with you, the way their bodies move. All of that telegraphs the embodiment. And when both bodies are moving in concert like that, you've got high sympathetic arousal, high neural connections in that moment, a high level of synchronicity also between heartbeats and respiration. And that's when we start to feel a beautiful sense of merging or transcendent with the other. And healthy sex requires being in the present moment and staying relational, which is all of what I've been talking about as well. You can't be in fantasy about somebody else or in euphoric recall about some sexual experience you had in the past if you're truly in the moment and you're truly embodied and you're truly in contact with the person opposite you. And this kind of sex relies on self-love and nurturance. You can't hate yourself. You can't be in a self-loathing, shame-based place in order to execute this kind of connection with yourself and another. And it's about surrender and vulnerability with another person. Real surrender, real vulnerability, really being able and willing to show all of yourself to yourself first and foremost, and then to your partner to see, the the little girl part of yourself, the vulnerable part of yourself, the little boy in you, the more assertive person in you, the aggressor in you, the part of you that feels, bold and adventurous versus the part of you that might feel a little shy but submissive or willing. So all of those aspects are what create an incredible vulnerability. And you will see those aspects also in the series that I've been talking about, Dying for Sex. And healthy sex requires the willingness to feel deeply, to really unzip, to really get naked, to really open your heart. And it's direct and it requires these kind of risks that I'm talking about. It requires self-confrontation for growth. So in healthy sex, when you're starting to feel inhibited or you're afraid of trying something because you're worried what your partner's going to think of you, or you're unsure of something, that is the demand that healthy sex puts on us. It is not just about a sex drive. It is about the development of a self. It's about being an adult sexually, about really taking yourself on, and being willing to be all of who you are. Someone says here, I have a great past with massage parlor. Oh, I have a past, sorry, with going to sexual massage parlors. Let's put it that way. I'm scared to have my wife touch me in similar ways in case I dissociate. How can I work towards rewiring that sex act in a healthy way that's safe for me and my wife? Well, I would say you should take it slowly. You should really start just with touch, and doing touch exercises where you're making eye contact, where you take turns with your wife touching each other, let's say for 10 or 15 minutes. And the rules of engagement are the person being touched says, you can touch me anywhere you like except for here. So if I say to you, you can touch me anywhere you like except for my right knee, do not touch my right knee. That is an exercise of building safety and trust. And so everything else goes. So the person touching gets to explore the body in any way they want. They just cannot touch the right knee and start to see what that feels like. In your case, it may be you can touch me anywhere you want, but do not touch my penis because I want to stay present and I want to see what it feels like to actually feel touched. And then, of course, you reverse roles, and the person who is being touched becomes the person who does the touching. So you start to acclimate yourself to staying present, and not just making it about genital contact. And then Richard says again, what would you say to a couple that wants to engage with another person for a threesome, especially if the third person is not known well to the couple? Well, I'd have to know a lot more about the relationship. Assuming that this is a straight sex therapy case and this is not a sex addiction case. I would be talking to that couple about safety and trust, first of all, and what the rules of engagement are going to be, who this person is going to be, how they're going to set it up, what their expectations are, how are they going to manage jealousy, how are they going to include each other in this threesome, what do they want from this third person. So there are a lot of conversations that have to be had about the rules of engagement before they go out and find this third party. And then, of course, the third party person has to be in agreement with these rules of engagement also. So when people do this sloppily, they just think it's a good idea. They go out to a club, they have a couple drinks, they pick somebody up and come home, and they have sex. And then the next day, somebody feels hurt or jealous or angry or not. Maybe they just have a great experience. But the more intentionality there is to sex, the better it is for everybody, regardless of what the sexual configuration is. Someone says here, when my partner wants me to perform oral sex when I don't want to, I usually do it because I want to protect his vulnerability and feeling of comfort to express what he wants. So I would call that codependency, and I really want to challenge you on that. There are times when I feel used and dismissed because you are using and dismissing yourself. By the way, you are violating yourself because you're agreeing to do something because you don't want to hurt his feelings. And it's really important that you hear that. Um, and so what is a better way to handle this situation? That would be the better way. When he asks you to perform oral sex on you and you don't feel like it, then you don't do it and you say no. I don't feel like it right now. I need to take a rain check. And think about what happens that you don't feel like it in the moment. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you've already had an orgasm and you just don't want to. It's okay. But both people have to be grown-ups and adults in the situation. And you managing what you perceive as his vulnerability, he may not be that vulnerable. And if he can't hear no, then he really needs to take a look at why he can't hear no and why that's so injurious to him. And then when you feel bad about yourself, awful, afterwards, feel awful and dismissive, it's not because he dismissed you. You didn't ask for what you wanted and needed, so how can he possibly dismiss you? You just violated yourself. And a lot of women do this a lot. And so I implore you, please do not violate yourself and then blame your partners for it. It's not okay. It's really important to take care of yourself. Yesterday, I heard a radio show on NPR, and I don't know, I mean, where the story was. Oh, I think it might have been on This American Life, and it was a story of a young woman who met a guy, and I think it was about love or love at first sight. That's what the stories were about, people connecting. And anyway, a long story short, they were flirting, they'd known each other, they got together, they had a date. They decided to have sex. She went to his house for the first time to have sex, and she was in her early 20s. And when she got to his house, the stage was set, and he'd gone out of his way to make things look nice and lit a candle and all that. And she went to the bathroom and she'd started her period. And she was mortified because she grew up in a family where you didn't ever talk about having a period, let alone have sex on a period. So there's this whole funny story about how she comes out of the bathroom and she tells him that they're not going to be able to have sex because she started her period. And this is a guy that grew up with three sisters. So he was completely nonplussed by it. No big deal for him, which she was surprised about. So they had sex when she was on her period. And afterwards, he got up and he went to take a shower, and she turned on the light and she said that the bedroom looked like a murder scene because there was so much blood. So she was so mortified that she got up, got dressed, and she stripped the bed of the sheets, put the comforter or bedspread over the bed, stuffed the sheets in a plastic bag and in her backpack. And when he came out of the shower, she said, "Oh my God, I'm late. I've got to go." And she left unceremoniously. And then it led to her going into a New York subway, and for some reason, they were checking people's backpacks and bags that day. So the cop opened up this bag and sees these bloody sheets and, thinks there's something really untoward going on. So she explains to him what happens. He walks back to her boyfriend's apartment, knocks on the door, and asks the cop what the guy knows about these bloody sheets. And he says, well, they're my sheets, and she just left with them. So mystery solved. She wasn't going to be accused of murder. But that's how embarrassed she was. And he said to her, he was using words like menstrual blood and period, which were words she never used as an adult because she didn't grow up that way. So I'm telling you these stories because as adults, we're able to talk about things like, I don't want to perform oral sex on you tonight because I don't feel like it, or I'm too tired to have an orgasm, or I love touching you, but I don't really feel like having penetrative sex tonight. And letting our partners tolerate that, and us tolerating their discomfort. It's not because I don't love you or like you or think you're attractive or want to be with you. It's because I need something different right now. And in the meantime, I would really encourage you to um, watch different movies, watch different shows about sex and sexuality, read books about it, talk to your partners about it, let them know what you're struggling with, what you're afraid of, what you're concerned with. Um, and things of that nature, so that you start to open up the conversation around sex and sexuality so you can have the kind of sex you want. Somebody asked a question about what an arousal template is. There's a lot you can read about that, but typically what it means is that um, we often early on, like before puberty, and certainly at puberty, that's a time of high hormonal shifts and changes, and any sexual thing that we see or do imprints into our nervous systems quite indelibly. And so, if somebody's sexually abused as a child, for example, their arousal template is going to be fused with excitation and secrecy, excitation, secrecy, and shame. Excitation, secrecy, shame, and something that is really dirty or bad. And that becomes that person's arousal template. And the danger is that they will repeat unhealthy sex in order to get that same experience, as opposed to unwinding what happened to them, dealing with the hurt and pain, and then recognizing that they may still like sex that's kind of excitatory and figuring out healthy ways to do that. So all of us have things that turn us on, that excite us. Oftentimes it exists solely in fantasy because we don't talk about it. Sometimes if we talk about it too much, then the fantasy gets sort of killed. So that's why it's important to do a lot of writing and journaling about this so you excavate what's really true for you. And those arousal templates can change also from as time goes on. Someone says, is it healthy to share your sexual past with your partner, especially if your past is more experimental than most other people? Well, it depends on who your partner is, and you have to ask yourself, what is the point of this um, sharing? Why would I be telling this person this? Now, if I'm a person who's in recovery from sex and love addiction, and I have a program, and I have a history of, let's say I grew up in a family where it was emotionally abusive, not sexually abusive, but just emotionally abusive, which is 90% of most sex and love addicts. Um, and I want to give my partner context for how far I've come in life, what I've learned, some of the things I've done that I'm not proud of, or things that I don't want to do sexually because it's too painful for me or it replicates my trauma. Then I think it's really important. But just to say, hey, let me tell you about all the wild and crazy ways I had sex, and I know that it's going to be upsetting to you, then that warrants a different kind of conversation. Because there are plenty of people that really don't want to know about their partner's past sexual exploits or their past boyfriends or girlfriends. Like, who cares about those people? You broke up with them, and I really don't want to be friends with them, and I don't want to know about them, and I don't know what want to know what your sex life was like about them. Other people might find that kind of arousing to hear about it. So you've got to determine by having a conversation with your partner, how much do they want to hear and what don't they want to hear? And how much do you want to hear and what don't you want to hear also? And what do you do with sexual arousal of terror due to childhood sexual trauma? Well, I think you have to work through that terror first and foremost. And then you've got to decide whether or not that terror is just a part of your arousal now and how you're going to engage in that in very healthy and explicit ways. And that's why a lot of people go to pro doms. They go to professionals who can reenact that terror with them in safe ways, very, very safe ways. So I would suggest you talk to a therapist about that, especially a sex therapist, so you can find ways of parsing out and eliminating the trauma reaction to see if you still need that terror to get aroused. Because terror is an arousal state in the autonomic nervous system. And if you need terror to get to orgasm, you really want to take a look at why that still is, and if you can dial that back a little bit. Um, Someone writes, a person I know calls the attraction we have pheromones. Do you think this means that we are not really into one another and the whole thing has been dismissed? That's a little reductive to say that it's just pheromones. Pheromones are certainly an aspect of attraction, but they're not the sole reason we're attracted to another person. And how does one learn to distinguish between when fear, shame, unease is a signal of an unhealthy or destructive sexual desire, and when those feelings are the residual effect of toxic shame, like religious or body shame, or even the result of ingrained fear of sexual intimacy? Um, well, I think a lot of those dovetail together from what you're saying, and I would say that's really a therapy question, that there's a lot in that question that you're trying to parse out. So that really requires a deep excavation in therapy, and also doing a lot of writing and journaling about what you think is what. I think sexual reflections, that workbook really looks at a lot of that, especially for people in recovery from sex addiction. How soon after learning my husband is a sex addict is it safe to resume having sex with him? How far into his recovery journey should he and I be? Well, I think again, that is a very highly tailored and personal answer to that. I have no idea what phase of recovery you're in. I don't know how much betrayal trauma you're still carrying in. I don't know how much recovery he has. So that is a question for your therapist and also your couples therapist, if you have one at this juncture. So the two of you decide, for you, the main thing is, do you feel safe and do you trust this person? Because if you don't trust him, you should not be having sex with him. Because then you're just hurting yourself because he could lie and he could cheat again, and then you're going to be angry all over again. But this time it's more your fault because you trusted somebody or you had sex with somebody you didn't trust. So if you have sex with somebody you don't trust, whether it's somebody who's cheated on you or your next door neighbor that you don't like, and you find out that they lied to you again, that's ultimately on you. And both partners are high libido and engage in frequent sex, but over the past 6 months, one partner is having trouble climaxing, possibly due to work and life stress. How do you recommend healing the situation and approaching solutions? Well, I recommend that you not make a big deal about it, for one thing. If somebody's going through a lot of stress, then it's very difficult to want to have sex. And for the other person to just not take that personally. Sometimes sex is about cuddling and holding each other, or breathing together, or just having some understanding, when it's always about performance and penetration, no matter what. And the person who's not stressed out is feeling needy or rejected or abandoned. That's usually where the problem comes from, not from the lower desire person. So there's also obvious you can have sexual experiences with each other, but if one person doesn't orgasm, it's no big deal. It's not a reflection of your sex life or anything other than the person who doesn't orgasm just doesn't feel like it right now. So don't take it personally. In your experience, what is the best way to express how he could please you in bed. Does it emasculate a man to ask him to do things differently from how he's doing it? No. Again, that's childish to lay there and expect somebody to mind read or figure out your body. And it's childish if a woman or a man tells someone else the kind of rhythm they like, the pressure they like, the touch they like, and the person, their lover, gets offended or their feelings get hurt. There's no way for anybody to know what's going to bring you to orgasm but you. And if you don't give that information to your lover, they're going to have to figure it out by groping around like they're 16 years old. So why not tell them exactly what you like, what really makes your body come alive, so they know what to do. So this is what I mean about getting vulnerable and getting explicit and being intentional. You have to talk about all of it. And if your partner gets so wounded or offended, then they're probably not the right person for you. Now, obviously, there's an interim step there, which is saying, hey, let's talk about why this is so hurtful to you. Because I'm not doing anything to you. I'm just telling you what I want and need. It would be like if you cooked for me all the time and it was just so great that you cooked for me all the time, but the truth was you were oversalting the food and I have high blood pressure and I can't eat that kind of salt. But I don't tell you because I don't want to offend you. Meanwhile, I've got to go take blood pressure medication. I mean, that's just a wacky configuration. I have to be able to say to you, I love you. Thank you for cooking. I so appreciate it. But I really need you to not salt the food because it's making me sick. And the cook should be able to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know, as opposed to, oh, you don't appreciate my food. And now you're insulting my cuisine. And I'm never cooking for you again. I mean, you just see how ridiculous that would be if it were a cooking metaphor. And how do you help individuals or couples navigate changes in sexual attraction that can occur over the lifespan of a long-term relationship? For example, shifts related to physical appearance, weight, aging, or even personality changes. Well, these are really painful conversations, and they are conversations about grief and loss. And they're honest conversations also. And I have experienced and found that when people are really rigorously honest with each other, not brutal, not cruel, but really honest with each other, there is a sweetness and intimacy born of that when both parties can hear it, that brings two people closer together. And then we start to feel attracted to our partner because we're attracted to the human being, because the human being is open to hearing what we have to say to each other, as opposed to getting closed and defensive, which is ugly and unattractive. So I really want to challenge you to have a conversation with your partner about how we can talk about our bodies to each other. And let me tell you how I feel about my aging body before you tell me how you feel about my aging body. Let me tell you how I feel about my hair loss, my skin sagging, my body feeling like it's not my own, the way my, joints ache and pain all the time, or whatever else I have going on, and how I just actually don't feel very sexy. Then you can also tell me how you feel about my body and my looks, and I can hear you, and vice versa. That is a very, vulnerable, kind, and sweet conversation that two people can have with each other if they're willing to hold each other's hearts in that way and not get angry, hurt, and defensive. All right. Well, that was a very robust and rollicking question and answer. So I'm glad this was engaging to all of you. I hope that you will do some work in this area for yourselves and keep on thinking about it and have the conversations with your friends. Start with your friends, people that feel safe with you before you move on to lover territory, which can be a little bit scarier. And so I'll leave you with hoping that you have a beautiful May. May is the month of spring. It's Mother's Day, so we're celebrating all kinds of mothers, including Mother Earth, mothering our sexuality, all of it. So have a beautiful month, and I look forward to seeing you all and talking to you in June. Thank you.